I have the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rachel Paul with IAAP. And before we get started, we do have just a few housekeeping items to go over. We do have closed captioning provided today, and you can select the closed captioning icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be providing stream text links in French, German, Spanish, and Swedish, and they'll be posted in the chat. And we also have language interpretation today, and there is a Czech channel available down on the bottom of your Zoom screen. There'll be an interpretation icon. You can select that and choose the Czech channel to listen. We also have microphones muted to prevent any background noise and disruptions, and the chat will be monitored for general dialogue and technical issues. Please post your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to those as time permits. And we'll also be sharing information for a follow-up session, and the link will be shared in the chat to continue today's discussion. I wanted to present our speakers today. We have Susanna Lorin is our host today, and welcome Andreas Wilson as well. I'll turn it over to Susanna.
Thank you, Rachel. I don't have much to do today more than introduce our language interpretation and the speakers. So welcome everyone to the the IAAP EU webinar series. This is our second webinar in the autumn, and as usual we have our translated captions. Vous pouvez lire les sous-titres en français si vous suivez le lien fourni dans le Chat. Sie können das auf Deutsch lesen, wenn Sie dem im Chat angegebenen Link folgen. Puedes leer el español si sigues el enlace provisto en el chat. Du kan läsa texten på svenska om du följer länken som vi lägger i chatten. And I can't do that in Czech, so I'm sorry, Lukáš, Pavlina, but I know we have Czech interpretation as well, both spoken and in captions. So thank you very much for that. We are trying to make sure that we provide these translations in as many languages as possible, and this is the first time we try it also in the Czech language, so I'm really excited that we are kind of moving east also in among our European friends. But enough of that. We are going to listen to one of the most brilliant speakers that I know, Andreas Wilson, a Swedish UX designer that I met some years ago, also in a actually at that time face-to-face event, but then in many webinars over the years. He is not only a brilliant speaker, he's also a very warm person, doing UX in a way that you understand that he believes in humanity and wants to have the users in focus all the time. So not from the accessibility small world of accessibility experts, but rather from the outside, from the big world, where I think his perspectives on how to involve users and doing user testing and also using eye tracking, which is also he has been working with for a long time, is really important for us all to understand. So please, Andreas, enlighten us.
Thank you. And just for transparency, I sent Susanna the script for me, what I was about to talk about today. It don't include me being a brilliant speaker, but thanks for those kind words. I'm a little bit caught off guard. So we're going to start with the hardest thing when you are in Zoom and present stuff, and that is sharing your screen. And if we get that going, then it's all good from there. So let's see.
Yes, you
right.
are sharing. Perfect.
Yes, we are online. So thank you so much for joining me in this webinar. And I'm happy to be part of this day and proud to have received the invitation by the IAAP to talk to you about lowering the thresholds of user involvement. And my name is Andreas, and I work as a service designer at a company called Lexplore. And I sometimes refer to myself as a UX designer or simply just a designer. And in my case, this title usually shifts depending on what my activities within the design field are. We're quite a small company, and I'm one of few designers in the company as well, which means that I usually shift between crafts like user research, visual design, workshops, or strategic discussions. And I think the term service design also caters to our ambition to not only just build software for our users, but to actually create a service that influence how they operate, both within and outside of our digital system. And besides working at Lexplore, I spend some weeks each year to educate design and research at Nakademin, which is a higher vocational education institute in Stockholm. And that means that it's a post-secondary form of education that combines theoretical and practical studies in close cooperation with the industry. So the education that I'm part of is directed towards the user experience design, and I work there as an educator as well as being part of the steering group as a design industry representative. And looking from an industry perspective, I think that we have a gap to bridge when it comes to what we teach and what recruiters are calling for. And a lot of design recruiting ads within the user experience still basically want someone to make their products shiny, and they want some UX sparkle to magically make sure that users want to use your product rather than making it useful. And I think that's a good distinction to make when it comes to user-driven design as well, is the one between usable and useful. And I think making sure that people can use your product is a great thing, but making it usable for any type of user is what we should fight for in our field. But what's even more important from my perspective is to make sure that it solves the problem that our users are having. And that is when we find if our products are useful or not. So, because initially your users have come to you with a problem and they took a bet on your products being the solution to that problem. So the users in our case are mostly teachers and students. So Lexplore is an edtech company, and our mission is to help students become better readers. And this image shows a school student sitting in front of a screen that is equipped with an eye tracker. And that screen is connected to a computer that's being operated by a teacher. So the student is doing a reading assessment where she reads the text that is displayed on the screen. So the core of our business is using eye tracking and AI technologies to determine the reading ability of kids in school. And that is done by using this quick assessment where we ask the kids to read a couple of texts while sitting in front of the computer. And that allows us to understand how kids are engaging each word within the text. And that can be done in such an efficient way that we're able to discover struggling readers within a few minutes. And we all know that the early identification of reading difficulties can transform a child's whole educational experience. However, the complexity of reading is often underestimated, and the specific difficulties are not always easy to spot. And being a designer, I think one of the strong characteristics of Lexplore as a company is that how we are organized around design. So at Lexplore, design is often tied to a problem that we want to solve, and we rarely create, shiny design sketches that is being sent from designers to developers to implement. Our main design tool is usually a whiteboard or a remote version of a whiteboard and some topics to discuss. And design decisions are usually documented as articles in our common Wikipedia page. So that's a little bit different how I'm used to work at previous companies. And I think it's a good thing, because I believe that design as we know it is often a problem that has been solved so many times before us. Innovation doesn't always live in how you design your icons or where in your user interface your buttons should be located. I think most digital user interfaces serves their purpose most efficiently if they use best practice design patterns. And I think that a person working as a developer or a product owner has equally good take on what a design patterns are working or not than me being a designer. So that's why a big part of my job lies in user research or requirements gathering or problem definition and workshop facilitation. So I like to get as much as possible from the common creativeness in our product team rather than just thinking myself as a design hero, because I think that's the old way of doing it. So The most frequent question in my vocabulary as a designer is why? Why are we building this? Why do you think it should look the way it does? Or sometimes I ask the harder and slightly bigger question, like, why are we here as a company? Or what's our purpose? And sometimes I guess I can be quite challenging on the people in charge of my company, but I think being in a question of the things around you is a good thing, especially if you are building products. And when it comes to user involvement, I think that why is a valid question to ask here as well. Why do we need to involve our users at all? Why can't you just build things according to industry standard or accessibility regulations and get on with it? And I think that's a valid point to make. And I think we need to be able to answer that also. So some people like to use a famous quote that they've heard that goes, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And this quote is often attributed to Henry Ford, even though it's widely claimed that we just don't know that he said this at all. And even if it's a fake quote, I still think it's a good quote, so I often use it anyway. But I think it's often misused too. So what it says is not that you shouldn't do user research or talk to your users, but what it does say is that it highlights people's desire to express the problems they're having as solutions. So when we encounter a problem, we often think of what the solution might be. Then we express that instead of articulating on the problem. And that is because we are a creative breed. And that's also why you need user involvement, because we need to talk to them in order to understand the underlying problems. And since we are a creative breed, we usually start with ideas like, wouldn't it be great if we could do something like this? Or I think we should do a product that does that. And when you're speaking to users on those terms, then you're usually in the solution space. And your conversation is most likely driven by the ideas that's already on the table. And what you do is that you end up iterating and improving the solution that has already been proposed. So you work with usability, but not necessarily with usefulness. And usability is great, but and that's something you should do, but you should try to verify that the proposed solution is the right one as well. And that's also what's being encapsulated in this fake Henry Ford quote. Then in order for you and your organization to build useful products, you should investigate in the underlying problem. Why would someone say that they want a faster horse? What's the problem that they're trying to solve? Probably it's about getting to place on time. And then we have a wide set of potential solutions to that problem. And that's what we should investigate. So I still think, the quote is valid. It's just we really don't know who said it. When I teach this at Academy, I usually say that it's from Harrison Ford or someone a little bit more modern, or Elita Ford, the famous rock star. So as long as we get the quote, I think that's fine. So a good first distinction when you're involving users is the one between the problem space and the solution space. If we are in the problem space, then we try to define our users and investigate their underlying problems and needs. And a key part in building successful products is to have insights to the goals, motivations, and frustrations that they are having. Like, what are they trying to do? And why are they trying to do it? And what's preventing them to do that? So user involvement in this field is sometimes described as exploratory or generative research, because this will generate a lot of new findings. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming. Like, are we supposed to learn about all of the problems for our users? That will probably never end, you think. And one of the reasons that many seems to skip this part is, that we think that we have a sense of this already. We have, some problem that we've discovered, even though we have not articulated it as a problem. And that is sometimes described as local knowledge of the problem space. You have a sense of the domain you operate in and why you want to achieve the things that are in your roadmap. So in my case, working at Lexplore and helping kids learn to read, my local knowledge revolves around me being a parent to a 7-year-old daughter. She just received her first reading homework, and I can follow her progress. I'm also a user and a follower of the ongoing debate of the digital school platform that our municipality is using here in Stockholm. So I have a sense of the digital and administrational frustrations that her teachers might experience when assigning homeworks or trying to communicate with me as a parent. So that's my local knowledge, and that can go quite a way, and we shouldn't, we should acknowledge that as well. So that can sometimes be enough to start exploring solutions to the problem that I've already encountered. But it's so important to understand that the exploratory user research in the problem space contains endless insights to different perspectives, and that it might be, overwhelming if you don't find focus. And that has to do that we are taught to ask people for open questions about their experience in order for us to create a wider and less personal perspective. And a practical way of managing this is to use what you already build as hypothesis for what you need to learn about your users. So at Lexplore, a continuous part of my user research work involves talking to teachers or special education teachers and try to learn more about them, the domain in which they operate, and the challenges they're facing. In these meetings, sometimes I want to talk less about Lexplore and try to be as open and generic as possible. And the reason for that is mainly because I want to learn about them, but also that, in all fairness, Lexplore and the software we provide are essentially ideas aiming to solve the problems we think they're having. And sometimes it's good to get away from that perspective when talking to users. And that might give us more insights to problems that we didn't know our users were having. But it can also be overwhelming, especially if you're working with design and research in an organization with a decided roadmap that's being executed on. Because what you want is for your work and insights to influence that roadmap. And then you also need to be efficient in your search for insights. So what you could do is to bring the motives behind the design decisions and try to validate them in these meetings. And this might sound a little bit backwards, but that's fine, because it's very rare that you'll start working at a company where no one knows what you're going to do or what you're going to build. And that's the same when I joined Lexplore. There has, of course, been a lot of research for me joining as well. But most of what we do in other companies are usually driven by ideas. And that's why we continuously need to benchmark them towards our users. And sometimes that's painful when you as a designer get the feeling that the company you're working on or working at is heading in the wrong direction. And I think the best thing that you can do then is to incorporate steering groups or product leadership teams into design and research work that you are doing, and do it in a way that they understand and in a way that you can use to leverage your insights. So you want to go from you have your local knowledge and you build your ideas around that. But one way forward here is to try to set up a process that involves the people in charge with the research and user involvement that you do. And most likely the product team or organization that you're part of revolves around ideas on what their users want. And it might be derived from different perspectives where local knowledge is part of that. It might have been previous research that has been made and so on. And a good way of getting them on board on your work is to start with acknowledging their ideas. So at previous companies where I had less influence on where we were going, I usually started with getting people that had influence into meetings and started working with them and acknowledge what they thought we should do. And a common tool in user experience field and in other fields as well, such as marketing, is the use of personas. And it's sometimes used and sometimes misused, or sometimes looked down upon as something you should not use. And at their core, personas are about creating products with a specific and not a generic user in mind. So user personas are archetypical users whose goal and characteristics represent the needs of a larger group. And usually a persona is presented in a one-page doc. Sorry.
Sorry, Andreas. No, you're showing a white slide. I don't know if that's what you want to show.
Yeah, what I could show you is a persona.
Yes.
This. So this is an example of what a typical persona might look like in user research. And one key thing to know here is that the name of the persona is usually made up and the picture is a stock photo. But the insights are real and they are a concentrate of the finding from user research, such as interviews, sessions, and other stuff. And they're usually expressed and chunked into a few characteristics, such as behaviors, main goals, pain points, and motivations. And the reason for this is to try to encapsulate and address different archetypes of users that you can derive from your research. And it can be things like some user groups are more tech savvy than others, and you want to encapsulate that need in a certain group, or it might be that others are having a hard time with new technology, and then you want to learn more about that. But I think one challenge that we're having from the UX field is that we are creating personas with a lot more detail than it's necessary. So I've worked at companies where the UX designers go into their own little room, and they close the door behind them, and they have all these post-it notes, and they do all this magic UX work, and they come up with something like this, which is a really nice looking persona. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to know how you should use this in your everyday work. And should you present information like the daily routine? Do we really need to know that a person or a typical user group likes to cook if they are working with a software within the healthcare sector, for example? So I think that sometimes drives people away, to be honest. And I think personas can be good in some cases, but they require high design maturity in your organization that you're working at. And the people who will make the product decisions will have to buy into this tool and understand the benefits of it in order for this to be useful. So my experience from working in different fields and different organizations is that people don't have too much time to invest in your work or your perspectives. And all of our colleagues have more things than they can barely handle to begin with. And then you ask them to invest in your persona work and acknowledge that this is what will help us make the right design decisions. And that's why I think it might be smart to start with the ideas of the people that you want to involve, even if they're just ideas, because we'll fix that later on. And a practical tip here is to cut to the chase and also get the people in your organization on board as soon as possible. If the people you work with needs to be convinced that your user-centered approach is important, then you need to involve them to begin with. And I think it's important to remember that doing user research and then create good and engaging personas is time-consuming work. And the people around you might not know what you're doing, or even worse, why you're doing this.
So again, just showing a white screen.
Yeah, I know. So at Lexplore, if we're about to create personas of school students as an example, then it would be easy to think that the segmentation work would give us personas such as the high-performing kid in one end and the struggling student in another. And creating personas could be then a lot of stigmatizations. So when we talk to users or teachers, they sometimes use demographics as a way of describing their school or their user groups. And that could be, we have teachers that says, I work in a school with 90% white kids, or I work in a school with a lot of immigrants. We have a lot of problems. And then if you were about to create a persona encapsulating the issues that they were having, then it would probably be a lot of stigmatization about, we would create one persona with, a typical Swedish sounding name that was high performing, and then you would create, the opposite. And that wouldn't really be helpful, I think. So what we don't want is to be stigmatizing, and at the same time we really need to address the truth that we operate in. So what we are doing, or what you could do in order to get going with this work and cut to the chase, is to start to look at behavior groups instead of personas. So we skip names, we skip pictures, and we skip the detailed descriptions, and we create groups such as, in this case, we have students with the need of integration and progress, which are students that need achievable goals, positive feedback, and small wins in order to stay on track and be motivated. And these students need support from the surroundings. And then we have another behavior groups that is students that needs to be individually challenged. And they need relevant training material and challenges in order to stay motivated. And in real world, this is a need that is relevant to both high performing and low performing students, because motivation is one of the keys to success here. And some students have social needs where they want to do as their friend does, or prefer to work with others in order to stay motivated. And the way of working with this instead of personas is that it allows you to work together with people in charge, and it allows them to create hypotheses of what we think our users are like and what problems or issues they might having. And some people refer to this as proto-personas, which is just short for prototyping personas, meaning that instead of doing a lot of research and then create personas from what you know, you could start in the other end. That's fine, as long as you acknowledge what insights you are sure about and what insights that you are guessing. Because one thing that we want to do here is to get everyone on board in the user involvement work that you're doing. And one big challenge that I've experienced at previous jobs is that user experience design and people within the UX field is, sometimes doing work isolated from the rest of the organization. And one of the key things in UX is not only to find insights, but it's to share and get the rest of the organization to understand the insights. So this segmentation of insights in behavior group have a few positive things that we think that they are achieving instead of creating too detailed personas. First, these segmentations were done together with the product leadership team and done with some brainstorming and local knowledge of, some people in this team that we're working with have teaching backgrounds, for example. And also what we've learned from other insights gathering, such as reading the daily news or doing interviews. So, we do different kinds of research, but if we gather the people that are in charge, then we have mandate in the room. And if we allow them to be an active part in your process, then they'll be more open to buying into your methods. So instead of gather people in charge of your product and say, here is my research, these are my findings, this is what you should do, you should say, this is our research, this is our hypothesis that we will validate or update depending on my further investigations. And this is what we think we should do currently. So I think it's a cultural thing about trying to break the silos and get people on board and engaged in your work from the beginning. And then when you have this way of working and up and running, you can spend time backtracking the hypothesis with insights gathering, such as more interviews. So everyone is on board that you should segment your user groups into different behaviors to know how to act on them, or how to prioritize them and decide what solutions to build. So once they're on board, you can then fill these with more insights, or you could create more behavior groups and learn more about that, because everyone knows why we're doing this and they have been involved from the beginning, and we didn't spend too much time on coming up with fake names or fake images or different biographies or personas, or deciding if our persona likes to cook or go out on running or not. So for me, this is a way of lowering the threshold of user involvement, because it allows you to start having a user-centered mindset, even if your initial version of these behavioral groups are made only by your own hypothesis. because these well-established buckets will be something that you can fill with new insights later on. And I also want to point out that it's not a bad thing to piggyback on research that others have done before you. And in your case, working with teachers and students and their ability to improve their reading, a lot of research has already been made in this field, and sometimes issues are up in the news as well. And we should incorporate that in our findings as well. So it's not always about doing your own research or spending much time on interviews. Thinking outside the box and thinking about users is also a way of lowering the thresholds to them. So this way of doing things is a kind of evaluative research, where you build your hypothesis around your users, and then you learn and observe, and from that you make your conclusions. And that's an ongoing work. So the risk with this approach might be that you make some big misjudgment about your users and their needs to begin with, and that it will lead up to you to making the wrong decisions in the future. But the good part here is that we have established a way of working, and that people might be more open to the changes that you discover with further research. And so creating behavior groups is a practical way of getting started, and especially if you do it in a context where people who have product mandate are involved, and making them co-creators is a way of getting them on board. Because no one will stop what they're doing to await your research results. And I think that's why an approach where you collectively define your hypothesis around your users will give you a fairly good bet on the direction you're taking. And then your research and user involvement will influence that direction. So eventually, we want to find people that can be scheduled for interviews. And a great book about user research that I like to recommend is one called Just Enough User Research by Erica Hall. And she is the co-founder of Mule Design, which is a strategic design agency based in the United States. The great thing about this book is the humbleness to the craft of gathering insights, and to the fact that things will move on in your company, with or without your user involvement. So your user research will only affect the direction that you're taking. It will never, stop what people are doing. And that's why you should focus on getting just enough insights to make well-founded decisions on your design, but also try to avoid drowning in your own research. And there's a quote from her that I really think encapsulates the work of gathering users. It says, "In theory, recruiting is just like fishing. Decide what kind of fish you want, make a net, and go where the fish are. Drop some bait in the water and collect the ones you want." In practice, recruiting is a time-consuming pain in the ass. Embrace it, get good at it, and all of your user research will be faster and easier. And I'd like to add to that, be kind to yourself and go with what you have, and acknowledge the progress that you're making, because it's hard to get the right user to talk to, but all external communication is an ongoing transfer between ideas and insights. And I think that's good to remember. So like in software development, for example, they have this thing called rubber duck debugging. And the idea behind this is that you have a rubber duck next to your computer. And when you encounter a problem, you can explain that problem to the rubber duck. And this is based on the insight that if you start to articulate or present your problem to someone else, you might discover the solution to this problem. And even though my ambition with this webinar is to lower the thresholds to user involvement, 0 users might be a little too low. But I think the attitude towards always searching for feedback on your work is far more important than the exact numbers of users, or that your users belong to the right target group, because we need to work with what we can get. And I have this matrix where I try to map out different user groups, and some groups might give you better insights than others. But the idea here is to get going with working user-centric, and one user is better than no users. So this matrix has 2 axes that might be helpful when it comes to defining target groups and recruiting users for that target group, and then eventually for interviews. The one at the bottom where it says easy to find, that goes from the left to the right, and that tells us how hard or easy it might be to recruit users from the target group. So the easier they are, the more to the right you will go. And the axis from the bottom to the top tells us how valuable insights we think we can get from them. Because we talked earlier about local knowledge, and that's insights, but that's only the first step. So if I were about to start from a fresh, user recruitment in Explore, and I were about to pretend that we have never talked to users at all without any guidance or any existing users, I would just, need to start planning on how to reach my users. And that is where this matrix can be really helpful, because what I've been forced to do if I were all by myself is to start digging where I stand. So how can I get to people that I have a relation to, that to what we're doing at Explore? So how can I learn more about the problems that we need to solve in relation to literacy? So digging where you stand in my case would mean that I would talk to my kids, for example, and then talking to other parents. And if I should start from scratch in insights gathering on this subject, I would learn quite a lot from them. So the number of people might be too few, and their perspectives might be biased or skewed. And there might be people who would rather be considered stakeholders in them than actual users, depending on where we're going with this product. But that would give me a good start. So I would start looking for and talking to my kids or other parents. And then I would try to estimate how much or how valuable insights I might get from talking to them. And of course, my kids are not going to use the system that we're building, but my kids may explain problems or issues or what they think about literacy or reading in general. And if I learn something, then I have learned more than nothing, basically. And that's the approach that I would like to have. And then I know from the work that we're doing that we need to start finding more relevant people that can give us more insights. So I should start planning for recruitment to the users that I expect to learn a lot from, such as teachers or even special teachers. So teachers are a target group that needs more time recruitment, and I need to find them. I need to be prepared to offer them something in return for the time, and they need to find that time as well. So I place them in this part of the matrix to the top and the left. So I know that I need to talk to them, and I will, but recruitment might take a bit more time. And in the meantime, I can talk to the people that I have easier access to. And doing this provides us with a couple of benefits. And I don't mean that you should talk to people that you don't think can learn you anything, but I think you should be kind to yourself when it comes to what you expect to learn. So some users or some people or some target groups might be a little bit off if you look at it from a critical perspective. But if you look at it from a lowering the user involvement perspective, I think it's good to have a culture and an ambition to talk to a lot of people in general. So, and that's the first benefit of doing this approach, is that it gets us going and creates a user-centric culture. We lower the bar of talking to people. We don't think it's too important to find, the quote unquote right users. We value the culture of user involvement higher than waiting for the perfect user to talk to. And the second good thing about this is that we refine and we improve our interview scripts or our prototypes that we want to test. Because when we start with people that we can allow ourselves to consider less important for our project while we still learn, in our case, some of the teachers might only have time to talk to us once. And then we don't want to waste that time on presenting a prototype that's not working. That's something that you can discover with your other people. So we don't have that. So this approach also, learns us to refine the work and that we want to present to the stakeholders or the different user groups as well. So you should start with the user groups you have on the top right, because they are easier to find, even though the insights might be a little bit biased or skewed or not that relevant. because it gets you going, and then you can plan the other ones in the meantime, and then you can include more as you have more time. So that's a cultural thing about involving users and lowering the thresholds about, you know, finding the quote unquote right users. And when it comes to testing design or prototypes, we should allow ourselves to test on users that are not always part of your target group, because that can also bring your work forward. So starting the work of gathering insights about our target groups can be a little bit about putting together a puzzle. It's messy, and you have a gut feeling that that says that there are a lot of potential answers that we have not yet sorted out. But the more pieces you add, and the clearer the picture will become. And it's also easy to see the progress piece by piece. So what I'm trying to say is embrace the chaos and uncertainty, but don't forget to acknowledge your progress. Look at how you work today and figure out what you want to add to improve how you work tomorrow. I think all types of processes in product development are subject to change and improvement, and that's how it should be. But that also means that you sometimes need to look back and acknowledge what you have achieved and enjoy what you have acquired. The biggest step forward is puzzling together the first two pieces, and then you're on your way. So there's a famous saying in product design that you only need to involve 5 users to learn about most of the problems your product is having. And that insight is derived from research that was done by a company called Nielsen Norman Group. And what they did was creating a formula that showed that the number of newly discovered usability issues leveled out after testing on a larger set of users. And that testing on 5 users were an efficient middle ground to encounter most of the usability issues in your tested scenario. So the more you test, the fewer new discoveries you make. But I think if you look at that backwards, you will also discover that the one user test that will most likely give you the biggest chunk of new insights is when you go from 0 to 1 user. And I think that's where you should start. And I think that's where your user-centric culture starts as well. So thank you for listening. And please, if you have any questions that you don't want to take now, you can also send an email to me as well. Yeah, that's it, I guess.
Thank you very much, Andreas. That was very interesting as always. And I want to also let everyone know that we have time still 15 minutes for for live questions and answers. So just use the Q&A function if you have any questions for Andreas. We already have some, but I was first, my first thinking was when you look at this from the kind of the accessibility perspective, then I agree that you don't need kind of hundreds of thousands of people to test with, but the very specific, for example, specific assistive technology that different user groups need, or specific user other user needs that are very specific to some target audiences. Isn't there kind of a higher minimum than 5, or at least a little bit more problematic if you add the kind of accessibility lens to this? Because I mean, there are some things you can't just figure out by guessing if you don't have the experience of working with people with disabilities.
Yeah, so my point is that if you don't do user testing at all, you should test with 1 user. But also if you are, I think accessibility is an interesting thing that we have discussed also from the insights gathering perspective and the needs and behaviors. So I think that if you're doing user testing and have an interface that you want to make sure that it's valuable or usable for most types of users, then you need to definitely broaden your perspective. But I think also if you look at the needs for the users, then I think it's important also from accessibility and inclusiveness perspective to actually cut off the needs from the different, you know, characteristics of people. I've encountered people making personas with people that are defined by people with different functional variations, such as using a wheelchair, for example. And what I'm trying to say is that if you use the school platform to communicate with the teachers in your school, then you have a need for that, regardless of if you can see, or if you are using a wheelchair or not. So I think the behavioral groups might not necessarily be that tied to different accessible differences, I think. But user testing if you have a certain interface, then definitely so.
Okay, so let's move on to the questions. Why are personas still so popular? That's an impossible question, but maybe you know.
Yeah, so I have a theory, and because we talked about personas in my class as well while I teach, and I try to get them to think about it critically. And sometimes you get really like drafty personas, and sometimes you get really nice looking ones. And I think it also has to do that we are a creative breed, and it's fun to create. To be honest, I think some people are very creative, and it's a weird thing, but sometimes I've seen classes where we have a lot of research, we do a lot of interviews, and it's quote unquote boring if you're a creative designer. And then finally you get to chunk these insights into a persona, and then it's nice to create personas and be a little bit creative in that sense. And I think also that if you look at personas, they're not only used in UX, they're sometimes used in marketing. And in that sense, I don't have too much knowledge about that, but that might be why personas could be useful, where you want to really dig into things like what brands people like or whatnot. So I think it's to be honest, maybe a weird answer, but I think some people think it's fun to create or something. And I think it's useful if you find it useful. I think you should continue using it. But what I'm trying to say is, don't hide in 6 months and then create shiny personas and present to your boss and say, this are our users. This is what we should, this is our users that we should design products for. It's more important that you start from scratch together with the people that you want to convince. And then you might not end up with personas. Then you might end up with something simpler. So you should think of personas as a tool, and if it's a tool that suits you, then you should use it.
Yeah. So that really leads into the next question: why most organizations, or many organizations, still kind of carry out design processes in the old-fashioned way instead of part of the product team, as you said. I mean, why do we still organize things in this niches and roles and don't let people talk to each other? Because it's the same for accessibility. I mean, the accessibility experts is also a kind of a different species that are often taken in well, sometimes late in the process as well, and not kind of collaborating to create things. So yeah.
I don't know. I think the answer could differ between. Sometimes you actually have a distributed organization where you actually involve developers from that you outsource developers, and then you think that you have to have really great designs and so on. But I think what I've learned, and from my perspective, because I'm also a creative person, and I also like shiny applications, but I try to to force myself into thinking that might not always be useful. And to me, the way that I discovered it was that I started to think about, why should there be so few people within the company to come up with the solutions that are supposed to be used by so many. And there's this famous quote by an industry designer called Raymond Loewy that says, design is too important to be left to designers. And I think that's a good thing, because I mean, it's kind of weird that you should have one person thinking about what is the next cool hamburger menu gonna look like, and then you have more people who are developers who also sits in front of their computer 24/7 that might have great thoughts on good design or not. It's just because you have managed to learn Sketch or Figma. It's just weird. And it's about, I think what I'm trying to say is that it's about me realizing that I'm not always having the best ideas. I think the best designers in my team are usually the front-end developers. But I can facilitate them and then take credit for their work or not. I don't know.
But it's also interesting with design, because still, I mean, from my perspective, it's really hard to get the clients to understand how important design is and more or less what design is. So I think when we present something around accessibility or code or in almost any other thing we present, then the clients more or less say, yes, thank you. I mean, they may be critical, but still they kind of accept that we have an expertise in something. But when we do a design brief, then everyone knows how to, you know, it's a little bit contradicting to what you say, but I think it's a little bit also sometimes frustrating for a designer who did some thinking before presenting this, and then anyone can say, no, I don't like blue, or, you know, it's just so it's also something that everyone pretends to be a designer or pretends to have competence on saying things on design. And I understand what you mean, that we all have a, you know, everyone who can see the design and experiences could also have an opinion, of course, but I don't think everyone.
I think and it depends on who the end user who the end user is and in what, you know, scope you're designing for. But in our cases, we are building tools that is supposed to be used by teachers in school, and I think they have other problems than buttons not being shiny enough. But if you're building, you know, public products or you know, marketing website, then, you know, the kind of design that we know it is, then it's, I guess it's more important. But in our cases, we want to lower the cognitive load of our users, and then I think best practice is a good way forward, and you know, use some standard material library if that's, you know, easier, and because
yeah, that's also what we find in our research, that, you know, I mean, it's not unique for us, but just to as a something we also need to remind clients about sometimes, that don't reinvent the wheel, but also don't build things that are upside down and left to right, because then it will become a barrier for many users, not only users with cognitive disabilities, but any user. If you don't recognize the way it's usually done, then it will take longer to learn the new system if everything is kind of upside down. So it's kind of nice with creative designers, but if it doesn't, if you just change everything for the sake of changing, then it's not really helpful. So, sorry.
No,
so another question is sharing insights. I guess within the teams sounds good, but how do you make developers interested in design and user experience if they are not in the? I think the background here is that they are not interested.
Yeah, I haven't encountered that. I've only encountered that people think they're not, and I've worked at previous works as well, where I started to you know, have design meetings that are optional. So I think, you know, I would like to challenge that question and say that, you know, try to schedule a meeting with your entire product team and say that you're going to design this view, and then you allow people to be optional, and then you will at least have a few more people outside of your, you know, design profession that would join from different perspectives. But it might be also that it's how you define design, because at Lexplore we said that the design is a way of solving the problems for our users. So when we are having design meetings, it can also be about, you know, how should we structure this URL, you know, that you copy paste between different fields, and that's also design. So if you want to involve other people in design, it might be that you also need to broaden the definition of design, and not only, you know, today we're going to paint. That might be it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's a tricky term sometimes, or I think people have different ideas of exactly where the limits are for graphical design design processes and things. So that may definitely be a problem. So the quote, your research won't stop what the company is doing, isn't the problem, isn't that the problem in accessibility when accessibility is a legal requirement? So if you don't, I think this means that if, the quote you had about your research, your results of the user research won't stop what the company is doing, but if the accessibility part of this is a legal requirement, then maybe the company needs to stop and rethink. That's how I interpret it, at least.
Yeah, and I think that in my case, I'm really fortunate, because at Lexplore, what they have before me joining is that accessibility requirements and the WCAG checklist, if you want to say, is that's up to the testing engineers to solve. So that has been a responsibility for developers and testing, and we have just said that when we are testing what we're building, it won't pass unless it meets certain accessibility requirements. So, and I think that's a really good culture thing, that it's not always a designer that fights for stuff and say that I want to add this to the sprint where we have higher contrast on our buttons. Because I think it's a really sad thing when you are, as you said, it's some things that you are releasing are actually illegal, so the way that we're currently working is that it's a responsibility for the product team in general, but it's something that the testing personnel or the QA is doing. So, and I think that's great. I don't know how to get to that. That was just how it was before me joining, and I'm just happy that it's that way we operate.
Yeah, it's definitely a success factor. I agree. I've heard, I don't know if this is true, it's another kind of quote that goes around that I don't know if it's true or not, but it's said that at least parts of the UK Gov usability team long ago, they presented all their features or objects to their team leader or some kind of high manager, and if it was in this case a man, could understand how this functionality worked, then it would be released, and if not, then that was kind of the idiot test, that if the manager can't understand what you're trying to do. I don't know if this is true, but I think again, it's also a good story. So you should try to, someone maybe within the company even should try to see if it's just kind of without getting the explanation, but still, so this functionality should just be presented, and if it kind of works without explaining anything, then at least it's not too difficult. So
yeah, okay. And I just want to add that I think that when it comes to the design and the people in design, even though that I think you should be humble and kind to yourself, I think we should be a little bit harder also. I think that sometimes the people in the design field use, we talk a lot about ethics or, empathy and things like that. But now we're facing times when we are on the verge of releasing illegal things. So I think I would like to talk more about illegal design rather than, unethical design, for example, and be able to stand up for yourself and try to be a little bit harsh, I guess.
Okay, so that is the final words for today. Designers should be tougher and make sure that they fight for good design. I think that's really a good ending word. So I know Rachel wants to give us the information about the upcoming events in IAAP EU, and also I don't know if you need to stop sharing, Andreas, to let Rachel.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm not sure how. Yeah, thanks.
We're all set. So I just posted in the chat that a link to continue the discussion and to learn more about IAAP and IAAP EU initiative. So that is on Monday, the 15th. And you can sign up to join us there and continue. And let's see, upcoming events in this series. We do have 2 more webinars. So this was the second of 4. So coming up on
That date is
Right,
wrong.
that's the
It should be
wrong
the
date.
23rd.
Yes, I just caught that on there. So on the 23rd of November is the next webinar in the series, To See the World Through an Autistic Lens. And again, it'll be at the same time as this one. And then wrapping up the series on December 7th, we have Applying EU Regulation to Native Mobile Apps. And that will wrap up our fall series. We also have the EU newsletter. I had to grab that link and post it in the chat as well. If you're not signed up for the EU newsletter, we can get, because you're signed up for that, so you can receive that monthly newsletter. And then we have another Enabling Europe event coming up on the 30th. So we'll be sending out some information and registration link on that here shortly.
And we did get a question in the chat around the links, that they were direct Zoom links and cannot be copied. So we have a question to send this out in the thank you email. And of course, we can send the registration links in the email. That's not a problem. So thank you very much. Thank you to all the interpreters, especially our Czech friends. And thank you, Andreas, for joining us today. Thank you for your valuable insights. Thanks for your questions, all participants. Thank you, Rachel, for taking care of us as always, and also early in the morning from the US. So, and it's now 3 o'clock Swedish time, and it's already getting dark here. That's a little bit depressing, but Sweden in November. That's really good place to be. Anyway, it's beautiful. So thank you everyone for listening. Please do join us for our upcoming webinars, read our newsletter, and keep up the good work in accessibility. Thank you everyone. Bye-bye.